Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's Move Minneapolis webinar, Become a Car-Free Hero, Tips to Overcome Transportation Barriers. My name is Windyk. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an outreach specialist with Move Minneapolis. Thanks for joining us today. Today's agenda, we'll be doing an introduction to Move Minneapolis. We'll have a discussion of barriers and potential solutions that you could implement in your life. And then we'll have time at the end for question and answer. One thing that I wanted to note while we are talking about barriers and solutions is if you're listening to what we're saying and you're thinking, I already know all of these things, I've already tried all of these things, I'm already a pro, I'm an expert at barriers, I have no barriers left. I would love for you to take some of this and be inspired to talk with others who may have barriers that they're still facing, and maybe you'll get some new ideas for ways to talk with others and to share this information with them. This webinar is being recorded. Everyone who registered will receive a link to the webinar recording and a follow-up email that'll come in the next couple of days, as well as links that we'll talk about during the webinar to resources and other information. Please use the Q&A button instead of the chat to submit questions. We'll hold questions until the end, but you can feel free to use the chat to share other tips that you want to share with others that are attending. And closed captions should be enabled. You can control those with the CC button near the bottom of your screen. There will be a short survey immediately following the webinar. We would love for you to take that and help us improve future webinars. Images that appear on the screen will be described for accessibility, and watch the chat for links that we will share once we're talking about items that you might want to click on a link for. We're going to start off by talking a little bit about Move Minneapolis. Our mission is to empower people to choose sustainable transportation options through educational opportunities and by reducing barriers. So there's two images on the screen. The top one is of some people with bikes standing in Loring Park, including an ASL interpreter. This was from an event that we partnered with Bike MN on to expose some people to biking in downtown. The other image is of our executive director, Tiffany Orth, sitting at a table talking to a member of the public at an event with a table in front of her with a map on it. And this was at a neighborhood association's annual meeting where we were spreading information about sustainable transportation. What we do, we provide employer services such as commuter fares, transportation benefits consultations, commuter surveys, and relocation assistance. We provide commuter resources and consultations, which I'll talk about more in a second, and sustainable transportation education, including webinars like what you're at right now, events like Car-Free MSP and our annual transportation summit, Bike Month and Bike Week and Bike to Work Day events, lunch and learns, and other outreach activities. On the screen, there's an image of a group of people with bikes on the number 9 bridge in Minneapolis. This was a group ride that Move Minneapolis led with some of our partners to highlight new bike infrastructure in downtown. The other image is of my colleague, John Barobs, standing behind a table with the Move Minneapolis logo at an outreach event with an employer. If you are interested in connecting with us, either through your employer or your residents, if you live downtown, to talk about any of these options, we'd be happy to connect with you. Send me an email, Catherine@moveminneapolis.org. I mentioned consultations. Customized consultations are available to those who live or work in downtown Minneapolis. They are free 15-minute sessions with me to talk through your specific barriers and potential solutions that might work for you. So if this webinar whets your appetite for talking about barriers and exploring different solutions, I encourage you to schedule a session with me. The link is bit.ly/move MPLS consult. And John, if you could share that in the chat, that would be great. Join your community for Car-Free MSP. We've got a couple of images on the screen here. The first one is of a table with some people taking the Car-Free MSP pledge at Minneapolis College. This was their Welcome Week event. And the Car-Free MS pledge is found at carfreemsp.com. And you can pledge to replace one trip that you would normally drive alone with a different option. Biking, scooter, transit, carpool, anything. Can pledge until the end of the month just for one trip in September, and everyone who pledges will be entered to win awesome prizes, including a brand new e-bike. And John will pop the link for Car-Free MSP in the chat as well. We have another image of a group ride going down West River Parkway. and the logo for Recovery Bike Shop in Move Minneapolis, as well as Car-Free MSP. On World Car-Free Day, which is next Sunday, September 22nd, we will be working with the Recovery Bike Shop to have a group ride from downtown Minneapolis to the World Car-Free Day celebration at Waubun Picnic Area. Gather next Sunday at 11:15 a.m. at Gold Medal Park to ride to the third image, which is Waubun Park picnic area. It's a picnic shelter with a bunch of people standing around with bikes in a park with trees, and it's very pretty. And they're partying. We're going to have a party for Car-Free MSP World Car-Free Day, noon to 3 p.m. next Sunday. Please join us. And save the date for our annual Transportation Summit, Wednesday, November 20th. The time exactly has not been determined yet, but it'll be a morning event in person, and we'll be exploring how businesses can survive and thrive through construction. To stay on top of all of our events and keep connected with us, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on socials, come to our events and chat with us. We'd love to talk to you. The next, meet the Move Minneapolis team. On the screen, we've got an image of Tiffany Orth, Executive Director, on her bike, John Barobs, Outreach Manager, in front of a light rail train downtown, and me, Outreach Specialist, in front of Metro Transit Orange Line. So what we're going to do is we'll all tell you a little bit of background of how we came to this work and sustainable transportation's impact on our lives. But first, I wanted to just give a caveat that none of us are representative of all people, of course, and we all have our own experiences. And that comes into play with the barrier discussion as well. We know that everyone has different barriers. Not every solution is going to work for every person or for every trip for every person. So keep that in mind as you're listening, and hopefully, keep an open mind and don't just say, well, that won't work for me. Think about the things that might work for you and things you could try out with your given circumstances. So I grew up in Northeast Minneapolis, and when it came time for me to get my license, I couldn't afford a car. So I figured, why get my license if I can't afford a car anyway? I was fortunate to be able to rely on friends and family to get around. But once I started my undergrad career at the U of M Twin Cities, I took advantage of the U-Pass, which was unlimited transit paid by semester for students at the U. I got around by transit 100%, and I was really fortunate for the robust transit system that we have. When I did turn 24, I finally had saved up enough money to get my license and to get a car. And I was working at the U of M at that time, and I started bike commuting 8 miles round trip. I was inspired by my mom, who had biked to work when I was a kid from Northeast Minneapolis to Dinkytown, and that was a pretty similar route to what I was doing. And I actually did my first test bike commute to the U on her bike that she used from the 80s going forward. So it's a fun little story. I was also inspired by these little green bikes that were popping up everywhere that year. And I figured, well, if visitors who don't know the city and people who just look like normal everyday people are using these bikes, maybe it's not so hard and I can try biking too. And honestly, I was also really inspired by having to pay for parking. Anyone who works at the U knows that you don't get free parking. And I had just, I had purchased a car and I spent all this money on a car, and I was looking for ways to save money by not driving it. So I loved saving money by biking to work when I could. And I also love combining transportation with physical activity because I don't like exercise, but for its own sake. I love the freedom of it, and really honestly loved not driving, as I found it really stressful. That turned into 3 years of winter biking. So I biked a couple years without, with stopping in the winter. And then I started just continuing on as it got colder and snowier. And I did that for 3 years. And then fortunately, I was able to move within 2 miles of the U. So then I switched to walking in winter, which I did for 5 years. So I biked in the summer and I walked in the winter. Now I have a 12-mile round trip commute from South Minneapolis to downtown, and I combine biking, light rail, bus, and walking for my commute. So I use different pieces of those to get me where I need to go. And I still own the car that I bought way back when I was 24, and I use it as little as humanly possible. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany Orth.
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everyone. My name's Tiffany Orth. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the executive director of Move Minneapolis. And my transportation story is really informed by, I think, a lot of people, a suburban environment that meant driving culture. I was I can remember, driving everywhere. When I was in high school, I was excited to get my driver's license because that meant freedom and independence. And, that pretty much informed most of my life up until I got into my career. And, my career really was informed by a passion for climate sustainability and protecting the natural environment. And so when I eventually got a job with my previous employer, Greater MSP, I made the decision that I wanted to move close to that employer in downtown St. Paul. And also informing that decision was that I wanted to get a dog. So I wanted to live close to work so that I could run home at the time and let my dog out. This was pre-pandemic where working from home was pretty much unheard of. And I also wanted to live within a livable, walkable neighborhood and reduce my carbon footprint all at the same time. And then fast forward, the pandemic hit, and between that and working from home, I also shifted my jobs to really focus in on that passion for climate and sustainability. Was fortunate to get this job with Move Minneapolis, where I could focus on sustainable transportation. And so since my job's emphasis is on sustainable transportation, but my new job is also in downtown Minneapolis, I had to figure out a new plan and way of getting around that was going to be different from my past commutes of just driving and walking. So right now, I won't get into it now because I'll be talking about later in the webinar, but really my current commute combines multiple modes between transit, driving, the occasional walking and biking if I am within downtown already. And within all of that, I just want to emphasize that, despite my passion for combating climate change and the fact that this is my job also, and I also have many privileges in life that afford me multiple options, it's still difficult, honestly, to always take a sustainable mode with the way my life is structured. And again, I'll talk more about that later in the webinar. But with just that, I wanted to lead off with emphasizing that it's not always easy and there are barriers. And I'm excited to share some of the practical things that have enabled me to make better choices when I can, but also to remind myself to give myself grace when I can't. And I want to encourage that for everyone as they think about their barriers and options. And just real quickly on the screen, there are a couple images that detail a little bit more about my life and my transportation story. To the very left is an image of me on the 3rd Avenue Bridge looking out over a beautiful downtown Minneapolis landscape. This informs a lot of my weekends and my working time of being around this area. And so excited when I can have the opportunity to actually ride a bike around both recreationally and for getting to destinations. I included that map of my journey between downtown St. Paul and downtown Minneapolis. That is a constant rotation that I am on between the two downtowns and trying to figure out the best way to make that efficient and productive and sustainable in my life. And then to the right is my dear dog, Ollie, informs a lot of my transportation choices and schedule limitations. So you'll hear more about that, but wanted to make sure everyone knew what I was referencing when I talk about my dog child. So. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, John, to introduce himself.
Well, thank you, Tiffany. I'm John Barobs, Outreach Manager for Move Minneapolis, he, him pronouns. On the screen, there's an image of a person walking, a map of Hopkins. The red dot represents my house, and there's a 2-mile radius circle around it. So I use transit, biking, carpooling, and I also own a car. I live in Hopkins, as I just mentioned, just 7 miles from downtown. And so all these modes work pretty well for me. I grew up, like many of you, in our car culture, never really gave it much thought. In the 1990s, I was visiting relatives in Latvia. My aunt, who was 75 years old at the time, did not drive. She walked and took transit everywhere her entire life. I was in my 30s, but I really couldn't keep up with her when she was walking around in the city. It was kind of embarrassing, but it was also a big revelation. So over the years, I slowly added biking and transit to my commuting options. And I was never really fanatical about it, but it was something that I added. And then fast forward to 2020 during the pandemic. And like many of you, I switched gears abruptly to work remotely from home. It was fine for a few weeks, but then it started to drive me crazy. My anxiety levels rose, and I felt cooped up in the house. Stress eating didn't really help my waistline. So I began walking Hopkins. And I soon discovered that almost every daily need was within a 2-mile radius. Groceries, drugstore, hardware store, post office, library, dentist, bakery, coffee shops, credit union, a dozen restaurants. I can walk them all. To keep motivated, I track my steps. My daily goal is 10,000 steps or 4.5 miles, 135 miles a month, or 1,600 a year. I do a monthly average, so if I miss a day or two here and there, I can make it up. Often people wonder, well, how do you carry groceries when you're walking home? Well, the simple answer is I go 2 or 3 times a week, and I bring one tote bag, and I can easily handle that. And I sure make exceptions. I'll do a Target run or run to Menards, but I try not to do it every week. So it's just a matter of planning. This walking lifestyle has many benefits. Health and wellness. I feel pretty healthy for a 61-year-old. My doctor tells me to keep on doing what I'm doing, and I don't have a health club membership. For gear, well, no gear is really needed except for good shoes and boots in the winter. And I do notice I have to buy shoes a little bit more often. Saving money. I don't have to fill my gas tank up very much. My 18-year-old Toyota has over 100,000 miles on it. The car was paid off years ago, and it's still going to last me a few more years at least. My insurance is even discounted to $60 a month because of how few miles I drive. And yet I still drive whenever I need to or want to. A lower carbon footprint is another benefit. Yet walking is the lowest carbon footprint by mode, and no pun intended there. A sense of community. I've learned so much about my city by experiencing it at 4 miles per hour. I also buy at local shops and services, and that's important to me. And I can also tell you who has the nicest wildflower gardens in my neighborhood. So it's those little things. Social benefits. The best benefit is meeting so many neighbors. That would never happen from a car. Many shop clerks, baristas, and librarians know me by name. My neighbors know me as the weird dude walking in the rain with the grocery tote. And they also wave to me, and I talk to them. So that's a really wonderful benefit. These benefits all come very organically, and now it's a lifestyle. I would like to think that today I could keep up with my 75-year-old aunt. And with that, we're going to get into some of the specific barriers that we had mentioned. In this particular slide, there's a couple images of a traffic jam, cars backed up on a highway, and a cyclist by a lake with a beautiful sunset and a very calm atmosphere. One of the common barriers is it takes too much time not to drive. Well, according to the 2023 American Commuting Survey, the average commute time in Minneapolis is 25.2 minutes. The average distance is 8.7 miles. That translates to an average speed of just over 20 miles per hour. That's not very fast. And then you add time going from the downtown parking ramp to the workplace. Or did you have to stop by and put some gas in your car on the way in there? How does that translate for transit? How does it compare? That depends on which transit option you use and the distance to the bus stop or station and the frequency of service of that transit operation. And remember that using transit means that you can also use your commute time for something more beneficial, like reading, answering work emails, planning your workday, taking a nap. So you can use your time because the driver is going to be doing the driving and you don't have to pay attention to the road. Let's talk about express bus service. It runs from park and rides or transit stations. Express buses have few stops and they can bypass traffic congestion using easy pass lanes or highway shoulders. It's a fast, direct way into downtown. Light rail. They have dedicated track, and they have right-of-way over traffic lanes. Road and traffic conditions, for the most part, do not impact travel time on light rail. Bus rapid transit, or BRT routes. They have prepaid boarding platforms, fewer stops, dedicated bus lanes, and signal priority at traffic lights. BRT buses are about 25% faster than regular fixed route buses. The average speed is between 17 and 30 miles per hour on dedicated lanes for the BRTs. Now, fixed bus routes, those are your standard buses. Yeah, they're a little bit slower. They are the slowest transit option. They have more frequent stops, and they have to stay in traffic with cars. But you can still utilize that time as a passenger while the driver is doing the driving to do something else, or you can just take a nap. Carpooling. So 2 or more people in a vehicle, and that would include a parent and a child. That counts as a carpool, and you can use the Easy Pass lanes toll-free. Easy Pass lanes are bypass traffic congestion, and they're available in sections of I-394, 35W, and 35E, and in the near future on I-494. And I'll drop the link to that in chat. Biking. Minneapolis always ranks near the top as the best biking city, and if not the very top. We have 114 miles of protected bike lanes and protected bikeways and bike lanes, and 101 miles of off-street bike trails. The average speed for a bicyclist is between 10 and 12 miles per hour. And if you think of it, somebody biking 3 miles or less to downtown has a comparable commuting time to somebody driving a car, and that's in most cases. So if you are relatively close to your destination, biking is a really viable option. Now, e-bikes take that to a different level. So you get the same benefits as an acoustic bike, except they're faster. They average between 12 and 16 miles per hour. And e-bikes also can extend the bike commuting range and also abilities for riders. So in other words, if you're a little bit older or you have some other physical disabilities, an e-bike is going to help alleviate some of those issues. So as you can see, commuting times vary by distance, traffic conditions, and by mode. Cars don't always have the same advantage on commuting times. And kind of a fun experiment. This past August, the Star Tribune conducted a race by sending 4 reporters using a bus, a bike, a car to a park and ride, and a car from downtown Minneapolis to the Star Tribune booth at the State Fair. The bicyclist won the race, and the car driver came in dead last by a long shot. It was kind of a fun experiment, but it illustrated that sustainable transportation can compete for speed and viability. And, if you want to do your own experiment and try a different mode and switch it up, I think it's great to do that. If you have any questions on how to do that, Catherine talked about the customized consultation service, which is a free service, and that was also posted in chat. Let's switch gears a little bit to another barrier that has been mentioned. And in this particular image, there is an image of a bus with a bike rack and a person putting a bike on the bike rack. And there's also an image of an e-bike going down a cobblestone path. So one of the barriers to active transportation is no showers or lockers at your workplace. Bicycle commuting to work is a great way to commute, save money, get a workout at the same time. It's wonderful, but who wants to arrive to work all sweaty if you don't have the option to shower and change into work clothes? It's probably not a great idea in the middle of August to pedal 10 miles in a suit and tie if you're going to be doing a presentation to a corporate meeting. So while some employers have bike rooms and showers, most offices in downtown don't have such amenities. And here are some ways to to keep on using active transportation and still be able to be presentable in work clothing when you need to be. All metro area buses and trains are outfitted with easy-to-use bike racks. Commuters can put a bike on the bus in the morning, and they're already dressed in their work clothes. And in their backpack, bring a pair of shorts and a t-shirt to change into at the end of the day, and you can get your workout on the way home and when you're riding home. We'll put a link in the chat that demonstrates with a YouTube video that demonstrates how to put a bike on the bike rack for a bus. And you can always ask the bus drivers. People are intimidated, and the bus drivers are super friendly and used to being asked to put a bike on there. Once you know how to do it, it's really easy. And if you'd like to try it at downtown, there's a demo rack at the Metro Transit store on Marquette Avenue that you can practice on anytime the store is open on Marquette Avenue. E-bikes, they're a game changer for bike commuting. With the electric motor assist, you can coast easily into downtown without breaking into a sweat. And if you do want to work out on the way home, just dial down the electric motor, or you can even turn it completely off and get a good ride home and a workout at the same time. I also wanted to point out that the ABC Ramps mobility hubs offer bike parking, lockers, and showers at a low cost. It's $50 a year to rent a bike locker there, and another $50 for showers with a personal locker, and this is an annual cost. I'll add a link to chat there. So these are just a few of the ways to keep using active transportation and still be able to present at a board meeting later that day. Tiffany and Catherine, did you want to add anything to this? If not, we can move on to the next section.
All right, thanks, John. I wanted to get into the barrier that I know is always at the top of people's minds when they think about different modes of transportation, and that's safety. On the screen here, you'll see some safety tips and resources, which I will reference throughout my conversation here. So feel free to take note of this or take a screenshot, but we'll also be sharing these slides out in advance as well. So I just want to first talk about safety and acknowledge that the dangers, both perceived and real, are real. And so everyone has different experiences around that. And I'm going to talk about a few of my own as it relates to different sustainable modes, and then just get into some of the ways that I have navigated around some of my experiences. So first is with transit. I think we've all seen stories and have had other personal experiences and have heard anecdotes from others on the safety and transit situation. And I do want to first put out a blanket statement that Metro Transit has done incredible work in this space and has a really great safety action plan underway. And so the situation is always evolving there. And if you want to learn more about that, we can share out more resources on that as well. But I will first reckon with some of the personal experiences I have had, particularly my story that stands out to me is during the pandemic when I had been a pretty enthusiastic light rail user. I live a block away from the light rail in downtown St. Paul, and really had been excited about that and had really positive experiences. And then the pandemic hit, things changed, and my experience that still stays with me is that I had someone basically yelling at me and threatening to kill me around my racial identity because of the kind of negative stereotypes going on at the time during the pandemic toward Asian Americans. And so I was, the train was going, I was trapped, I couldn't get off, and they kind of kept getting in my face, and when I tried to move, and they kept following me around the car, and so that really painted my experience, and is something that I still think about very much today. And I don't think that that's something that is unique, obviously, to me. Everyone carries different identities as they get on transit and take different modes, and that comes with different weights and considerations. So want to put that out there. And then also with other modes. So with walking, you know, Again, I love my downtown St. Paul home, but I would be lying if I said whenever I walk my dog every day, I don't experience, you know, usually some type of harassment or there are times I've been followed, you know, back to my building. And there are times, you know, again, where there have been different threats. And so that's something that, you know, I'm conscious of as well and try to navigate every day, as I do feel very strongly about being able to walk, you know, outside of my home. And then with biking, it's, you know, really, I think kind of what you assume a little bit more with biking, you know, it's scary thinking about some of the physical danger, you know, you might encounter from cars and traffic, especially if you're using biking as a commuting mode, you know, and I have a family history of, unfortunately, people getting hit by cars. And so that has been something that has always informed my view of getting around in that way. So that's a long way to say I don't want to start out by scaring with everybody, but I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that we're not here to tell people to do anything that makes them unsafe or makes them feel unsafe. But that being said, if you're here because you want to or need to try different sustainable transportation options, I want to just talk a little bit about how I personally navigated some of those safety challenges. So first was really just reckoning with my mindset. I think there's a lot of preconceived notions that go around using these sustainable modes as it relates to safety, as I just described. And to be honest, driving honestly feels safer a lot of times because it's familiar. It's a relatively controlled environment compared to other modes. Even though, you know, right, practically speaking and statistically speaking, we can see that it presents many dangers and can be just as risky, if not more risky, than these other modes. But it obviously is something that we've grown accustomed to. And I think that actually is something to keep in mind as you consider other modes, that half the battle is really kind of getting past some of those initial perceptions and getting more comfortable taking other modes. And the only way you really do that is by exposure and just continuing to do it and trying it when you can. And sometimes that exposure goes a long way with mitigating some of the mindset and challenges that you may perceive around safety on transit. And then with biking specifically, I've been fortunate in the last year or so as I've started this job to really relearn how to bike on city roads. And I, you know, of course, biked a lot as a child around suburban streets where it was much safer and felt different. But thinking about biking as a way of commuting and getting through busy downtown streets was a whole other deal. And I've been fortunate to have great friends and coworkers who have just basically allowed me to accompany them on rides around downtown. And that has gone a long way, both in terms of figuring out how to navigate the different infrastructure, and then just being able to, you know, look out for me and share different tips as we go along, because there's nothing like learning by doing, and having someone there with you to demystify everything and show me safe behavior has meant the world. So that is something that I highly recommend, is just starting with a buddy. And that actually, you know, goes across all these different modes. It's starting with a buddy can make all the difference. Specifically with navigation and infrastructure, I just want to mention that I think sometimes it's confusing when you're getting on a bike to figure out where you need to go, or like a bike lane might change and not be there the second, you know, if you cross over to another street, or the infrastructure might be unpredictable. And so a big tip that Catherine actually shared with me is just being able to pull over. You don't have to keep biking and trying to navigate. Pull over to the side of the street as soon as you can, and just take a moment to reorient and get your bearings, and, you know, and figure out what you need to do from there. Staying visible and predictable, that's probably a little more common sense to folks, but, you know, goes a long way again with making sure that you stay visible and that you don't kind of weave around crazily in front of drivers, but can really stay predictable to them about where you're going to go and signal to them. And then something I wanted to make note of, it's the middle image actually in my slide. There's an all ages and abilities network for bicyclists that the city of Minneapolis has been working to expand over the years and is still expanding. But this is really something that if you want to look up, there is an interconnected network of low traffic routes and trails that can really help you in getting around. And that is something that I wanted to mention too, with thinking about biking anywhere, is that the route you take by bike is not necessarily the route you would take by driving. So there are lots of other low traffic options to consider in getting around that wouldn't mean that you're biking on I-94. And then just lastly with walking, I really emphasis, I actually feel safest walking, honestly, even in spite of some of the other challenges I mentioned, because it's the mode I feel like I have the most control of. But that being said, whether it's, feeling unsafe with other people, being vigilant about your surroundings goes a long way. I actually took a self-defense class during the pandemic after the threatening incident I had on transit. And the key takeaway there is really just being aware of your surroundings, which I know sounds, basic, but honestly, that can help, again, mitigate a lot of common safety challenges that might arise. And then just quite frankly, avoiding areas, trusting your gut. If you see a stretch or you see a situation that looks questionable to you or feels questionable, avoid it all if you can. Take advantage of the fact that you are on your feet and, and try to identify a different way of getting around or a different area to go down to. And then lastly, with transit, something that is on this screen here is a number that you can text if you are on transit, if you are on the bus or light rail. Metro Transit has a direct line that they've posted on these on trains and buses as well, that you can text to report dangers while you are on transit, so that you don't have to make a call in front of people or in front of a situation. And just some other random pro tips that have been helpful are riding in the first car or riding close to the driver when you're on the bus or the train. That can go a long way. A lot of people don't want to do questionable behavior with that close to the driver. Sometimes taking the bus over the light rail has honestly been better. Sometimes I think the light rail brings its own challenges, unfortunately, that are being solved for, but sometimes busing can provide a little bit more of a better environment if that option is available to you. And then finally, always feel free to get off if you feel unsafe to the next time you can, request a stop or get off on the next stop on the train. This isn't encompassing all of safety, but really just want to emphasize that, if you can work past the mindset, try out some of these practical tips and do whatever feels comfortable with you. There's ways to get around and get around more safely on these modes. And then lastly, the image on the screen I want to mention is safety in numbers. Again, the point of bringing a buddy to everything you can do. That I will turn it over just to the next barrier, which is managing complex schedules. So really on the screen is just a list of tips. So I started out by talking about how I had moved to downtown St. Paul to be closer to my job and also because I wanted to get a dog. That dog ended up having numerous medical challenges that require me to give him medicine on an 8-hour schedule. And also he has a lot of separation anxiety. And so leaving him alone for long periods of time usually results in some form of destruction. And I also want to point out, I know that people also have human children, and that presents much more challenges than what I'm describing here, but maybe some of this can still be relevant for families and parents as well. So with all of that, I started out, really by seeing if I could have my mother watch my dog on days that I needed to be in the office. She lives in Maplewood, which is a 10-minute drive from downtown St. Paul. So I originally had consulted with my Move Minneapolis team here and was going to drive to Maplewood to drop the dog off in the morning and then take park my car to park and ride and take a commuter express bus into downtown Minneapolis. That was okay, but it really requires a long period of time that I can't always do every day or most days. And I'll just say the nature of my job, and I know for a lot of other people, is it's very unpredictable. And it's also something that requires me to be in a lot of different places with, short windows with different meetings and events. And also just in office time for some of our leadership team meetings. And so with all of that, and then also with other life things as well, I don't often have the luxury of being able to allocate a lot of time for some of these modes. So that really led me to kind of this crisis of how am I going to do this job? And if I can't even get around sustainably, but I feel like that also keeps me connected to others who might be facing similar challenges where you can't necessarily do sustainable modes, even if you want to all the time. And so for most people, going completely car-free isn't an option. And I really want to emphasize that that's okay. And just thinking about where you can replace trips where you can, thinking about carpooling or combining trips. Maybe you have the opportunity to adjust destinations where you can, and also can think about, planning ahead if possible, to allow for those sustainable modes. So again, really just giving yourself the grace, but also thinking about where you can slot out trips where you can is the main takeaway of how to manage complex schedules. And with that, I know we're kind of running short a little bit of time, so I'm going to turn it over to Catherine to close us out here with some of her barriers.
Thanks, Tiffany. I realize I neglected to describe my images on my intro screen, so I wanted to just go back to that. I had a picture of myself winter biking with goggles and ice hair, which is what happens when it's so cold that your breath freezes on your hair. You may see it as ice beard. I don't have a beard, so I don't have an ice beard, but I had a picture of a nice ride with a pumpkin in the basket. That was when I was working at the U and there were free pumpkins at work one day, and I had taken a nice ride in, and I didn't know how to, or I had walked in, but I figured I couldn't walk home with it. So I was able to strap it to a nice ride, and that worked out pretty well. And then there was an image of me with a big fluffy hood and a face mask waiting for a bus. And I'm going to talk about weather next. So I wanted to just mention those things because they are relevant to what I'm going to be talking about. And I wanted to just re-emphasize what Tiffany mentioned, and I think John mentioned too. You don't have to do these things every day for every trip. So that I really feel like applies for weather, because maybe it's the worst snowstorm in a century. Maybe you don't bike that day. Maybe that's the day you take the bus or the train, or some other options. So keep that in mind. And I also want to emphasize that Tiffany mentioned too, stay safe. So don't do anything that you think is going to put you in danger. You know yourself, you know your health. And I would encourage people to, try experimenting and expanding your comfort zone, but not to an extent where you're putting yourself in danger. I want to preface this conversation on weather with the fact that I have Raynaud's syndrome, which is a painful constriction of capillaries in the extremities when it's cold. So my hands and feet get extremely, extremely painful when it's really cold. And as I mentioned in my intro, I winter biked for 3 years and I walked to work in the winter for 5 years. And that's not to say that I just suffered that whole time. I'm not a masochist. I wasn't a glutton for punishment. It's an illustration of how even with a limitation like that, there could be ways to work around that. So the ways I worked around that were by getting a good pair of boots, investing in that, using toe warmers and hand warmers, and just kind of adjusting how I approach things. So I wanted to use that as a personal example as well of something that you would think maybe would stop you from being able to do something like that, but seeing if there's ways that you can work around that. So one thing I want to note is when you're thinking about if it's too cold, specifically, when you're using active transportation, biking or walking, you probably will warm up as you go. So your core will get warm. You may see people biking in the winter and they're not wearing big giant parkas, and that's because they generate their own body heat. So keep that in mind. What feels too cold when you get in a cold car and it takes your car 15 minutes to warm up, it's not really the same when you're walking or biking. So that's something that you could maybe experiment. What is too cold? Is this really too cold? Again, keeping safety in mind. As for me, despite my extremity issues, my core runs really warm. So when I was walking to work in the winter, I found myself just wearing a t-shirt with a light raincoat, and I would still overheat. So you may not be as cold as you think you might be, but experiment. Goggles are something that are great for getting around in the winter, biking or walking. I got them for biking, but then I started using them for walking and waiting for the bus. And you might get some funny looks, but you might also get some compliments. I've had a lot of people say, "You're so smart for wearing goggles." So I highly recommend investing in goggles. If there's a coffee shop or somewhere else you can stop on the way, if you're walking or biking to work and it's cold, maybe you can get a warm drink to finish out the rest of your commute, or just enjoy the heat for a few minutes while you warm up and head out on your way. There's also things like bar mitts or pogies that you can put on your bike that are basically like mittens for your handlebars that can keep your hands warm. They make down skirts, which can keep your butt warm, which can be a big challenge. And of course, dressing in layers is a really great thing to do. As far as snow and ice, especially if you're biking or walking or even getting to a transit stop, again, having a good pair of boots with some grippy soles can be really helpful. Adding cleats. They have kind of these cleats that you can attach to your boots that can help you with walking. Yak Tracks is a brand name of those. There is a Snow Ambassadors pilot program that the city of Minneapolis will be starting. It's a 3-year pilot that'll be starting this winter, where they're going to be prioritizing snow clearance on parts of the pedestrian priority network. So that could be something that if you're lucky enough to live in a place and have routes that you could tie up with that priority network, that could be an option. The Park and Rec Board in Minneapolis introduced recently a trail plowing map, which shows which trails have been plowed most recently. So if you are biking or walking and you're able to make use of those trails that have been plowed recently, that's a great option. Also, other just random things, if you're wanting to bike in the winter, but you don't want to get it all icy and snowy, you can get a beater bike. So just an old bike that still works, but you're not worried about it getting wrecked. Fat bikes can be great for riding on snow, and studded tires can be great for riding in ice. And another thing that some people might not think about, but transit can be safer and possibly more reliable than driving in the winter. I think most people who drive in the winter in Minnesota know that it can be very stressful and it can be very slow. So especially with the light rail, because it's not sharing space with cars, it can be faster and more reliable than driving your own car in the winter, and less likely to get in a crash of any kind. You know, crashes are pretty frequent in the winter for drivers, but not so frequent for light rail. I have on the screen an image of the Grease Rag Winter Skillshare and Gear Swap. This is for people who identify as femme trans women, and it's November 17th from 12:30 to 4:30 p.m. in the Central Public Library. This is an awesome event that you can go and learn all sorts of things about winter biking specifically. I'll send out a link to the registration in the follow-up email, and actually it's in the chat as well. If it's too hot, which is increasingly the reality that we're living in with climate change, I have some suggestions. Again, keeping in mind safety. Sometimes it is just too hot or the air quality is too bad and you don't want to be doing physical activity. But other times, maybe it's not as hot as you think. Maybe you deal with it better than you might think. So I have on the screen an image of a UV umbrella. You can use this to bring your own shade wherever you go. This is great for walking, keeps you cooler, and for waiting for transit as well, if you don't have a shelter at your station, at your stop or your station. If you're able to bike or walk in the morning, actually this goes contrary to what John was saying, but I think it's good to consider all angles. So I might consider biking or walking in the morning being the thing to do, because it can be cooler in the morning. So maybe it's cool enough in the morning where you don't get sweaty and you get to work, but then you use transit in the evening when it's hotter and it's too hot for you to bike or walk. You can put your bike on the bus or train, and if you're walking, you don't need to worry about it. If you have the ability to bike or walk more slowly, if you have that time, that could be something. Enjoy the summer while it's here and just think about how lovely it is that you can walk to work in the summer. If possible, again, I want to reemphasize, these options could be with a lot of privilege and maybe not everyone can do all these things, but is it possible to choose a different route with more shade and less concrete to avoid the heat island effect? Again, if there's a coffee shop or a restaurant you can stop in to get a cold drink on the way or enjoy some air conditioning, that would be great. Once you arrive at work or wherever you're going, depending on the situation where you're going, if you're going to work and you have a fridge, keeping wet wipes in the fridge might be helpful and a nice cool down and refresh, especially again, if you don't have a shower available. I am a big fan of fans. I keep a fan at my desk at work and I have it on most of the time when I arrive because I'm just really warm. Again, I run warm. I also carry with me a fan to fan myself wherever I go. This can be really helpful too. As far as rain, they do make a product called Clever Hood, which is a specific poncho for biking. So you could look into that. You can get waterproof panniers or backpacks. And I'm going to reference an image on the screen of a waterproof backpack. I'll note that this is a Car-Free MSP prize. If you take that Car-Free MSP pledge, you could win this waterproof backpack. So getting waterproof items can help with rain on an active commute. Grippy sandals for walking. Don't walk in flip-flops because you might slip, but if you get grippy sandals that strap onto your feet, you can just take those off when you get to work, dry off your feet, and you don't have soaking shoes for the rest of the day. And rain pants and overshoes are great for if you're biking and you don't have options to wear shorts or sandals. Next barrier I'm going to address is the idea or the thought that driving is cheap or cheaper than other options. So a lot of this comes down to psychology. Like sometimes it may be absolutely true. You've done the math, you worked it out, and driving is 100% cheaper than any other mode. And that is definitely a reality for some people. But a lot of the times it could also come down to psychology. I have an image of on the screen, a little icon of a brain with some gears and a heart in it to act as a psychology image. So I want to talk about psychology first in the sunk cost idea. So you bought this expensive thing and you want to get your money's worth out of it. Why would you buy it if you weren't going to use it? So a car is expensive, you want to get your money's worth. However, the more you use it, the more it costs you. So with gas, obviously, is tied to how much you drive and how far. Wear and tear increases the more you drive. Insurance, John mentioned having a low insurance route, so longer commutes can equal higher premiums. And there are also companies that have pay by the mile options these days. So that's a way that if you're driving less, you could be saving more money. Another thing that's kind of a psychological thing is the frequency of paying for something can make it feel cheaper or more expensive. If you have a one-time payment where you bought your car outright, or if you only pay for insurance every 6 months, or you only pay a car payment every month and it's automated, it doesn't feel as painful as shelling out a couple bucks every time for the bus that you take it. So a way to combat that feeling is to automate it and get a pass. So get a monthly pass so that you don't have to be paying with, every time you ride, and that'll feel less painful, especially with the Metro Pass. Metro Pass is great. It's available through employers that offer it, that are enrolled in the program. And that is paid for through your paycheck. You actually don't even have to see the money leaving your paycheck unless you go and look at your pay stub. So that makes it really automatic. And the kind of the opposite of that sunk cost thing that I mentioned with buying a car, the more you use the Metro Pass, the more it is worth to you, because once you've paid for it, if you use it more than it equates to how much you would have paid if you were paying each trip, you're actually saving more money. And it's a 24/7 pass that has access to the entire system. This is the Metro Pass I'm talking about. So you could use it beyond the commute and save even more money. So consider that. Efficiency, I have on the screen a clock and it equals $1 sign. So time is money. Combining exercise and the commute, if you are biking or walking or even taking transit, which includes more walking, can save you time. So time is money, as I mentioned. Working while commuting on transit saves time. John mentioned that. There is free Wi-Fi on all buses and trains through Metro Transit. So perhaps you're able to use your commute time more productively than if you were just driving alone. Active transportation could save on gym costs. So I have an image on the screen of a spin class and it says commute as workout. So granted, a bike ride is not going to replace a full gym membership. There are so many things that you can do at a gym that just biking is not going to accomplish, or walking. But maybe you're driving to the spin class. Could you maybe bike to work instead of that? Would that be a possible replacement so that you can cancel your spin class and save some money there? Also save some time. You don't need to come home and then also go to the spin class or other things like that. So just thinking about ways that working exercise into your life without making it exercise. Like I said, I don't like to exercise, but I love to bike commute. That could help save on some costs there. And again, this is not a one-to-one connection, but active transportation could save on health costs. So there's many conditions that are prevented or improved with physical activity. So if you're increasing your physical activity, it's possible that you could be reducing your healthcare costs. And with that, I am going to turn over to all of us. I think my slides are gone, correct?
Yeah, I think we have your desktop. That's okay.
I got my desktop. Oh, stop share. There we go. And now there's nothing there, right?
Right.
Okay, great. So we are going to look at questions now from the audience. And we had one for John about insurance.
Sure.
How did you get this low insurance rate on your car?
Well, you clued in one part of it already. So in my walking around, I discovered my insurance company. There's a State Farm office less than a block from my house. And the agent, I switched policies recently. The agent would see me walking around. So he knew that I wasn't lying when I said that I don't drive everywhere. But that being said, I have a transponder that I put in my car, and that logs my driving habits and also the distances I go and things like that. So different insurance companies offer the same type of thing. This happens to be State Farm. But I had a discussion with my agent about this, hey, I don't drive very much. What can you kind of a deal can you swing? And that's what we came up with. And so far in the past 6 months, since I switched, yeah, $60 a month is what I pay. And I'm happy with that. Now, obviously if I take a road trip or something like that, my mileage is going to go up, but it's not going to change unless I start driving a lot on a regular basis.
That's great. And actually, I didn't know that you were doing that. So I learned something today, and I will have some questions for you on that, because that's something that I have considered. I don't have it myself. I have regular insurance that most people do, but it's something I'm very intrigued by. So John, I will connect with you to get more information about your experience. So thank you for sharing. We have someone with their hand raised. So I'm going to go ahead, Hillary, and unmute you if you want to ask your question.
So Hillary, I think you have your own mute on.
I am. There you go.
Hi, sorry, I didn't mean to click the raise hand button, but thank you.
Oh, okay. No problem. All right, we've got another question in the chat. Are Lime bikes or other rentals available in Minneapolis again now? Are there still set areas to drop and collect? Do you know, or do they seem more random? Anyone can jump in.
They are available. So they do not have set areas though. So if it seems more random, it is more random. If you are interested in using Lime bikes or scooters or Vio scooters, you can download the apps and then they will help you locate where the nearest one is to you. And then you are allowed to leave them within the city limits in certain spots. So yeah, there's no docking stations, but it is available through, I believe the end of October or whenever snow really hits us. So, and then it'll be available again, hopefully in the spring. John, things you'd add?
I was just going to say that yeah, the date will really be weather dependent, how long services will be available. And you can look, once you do download the app, it'll have a map there. So it'll show you the parameters of the area that Lime and Vio, where you can ride. Different municipalities have different contracts with providers, so it's something that you should check. And we've had a number of different service providers in Minneapolis over the years. It could be different for your community, but in most cases, you're able to find at least one provider in your area.
Yeah, I'll just add that Lime also operates public bike share in St. Paul, and we also instead we have Spin offering e-scooters for getting around.
Yes, and I believe the city of Minneapolis used to have a page. I haven't been able to find it just quickly clicking around, but it had some guidelines around where to park these vehicles. So Kate had asked if there was a place to drop them in. So there aren't docks anymore. There's no stations to drop them at, but you do still need to keep them out of the public right of way, which basically means streets and sidewalks. So you don't want to leave your vehicles, whether it's a scooter or a bike from Lime or Vio. You don't want to leave those in the middle of the sidewalk, blocking any access points for people using the sidewalk. And there's other things that you don't want to lock up to. You can't lock up to stop signs. And I think there's Metro Transit signs as well, bus stop signs. But you are supposed to actually lock those vehicles up and keep them out of the way of people using the sidewalk. So if I can find that link, I will send that in the follow-up email as well. All right. Winter biking. I've never tried yet. Are there used bikes that I can purchase? Fat tire bikes are so expensive. That is true. Yeah. Again, I just threw out, oh, just buy a fat tire bike. Yeah, that's not possible for everyone. Used bikes, you can try Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or things like that, but I don't know how reliable those are anymore. That used to be a place where you could get bikes. That's where I bought my first used bike many years ago. But if you have any neighborhood groups that you follow on social media where people are trading bikes or selling bikes, things like that, you can do that. Facebook does have a bicycle trading post group that I can also try to find a link to and include in the follow-up email. Otherwise, there are still bike shops. Recovery Bike Shop, the one that we're partnering with on Sunday, is in Northeast Minneapolis, and they specialize in used bikes. And many other bike shops in the metro area do have used bikes as well, beyond just new bikes. You could look at new bikes or used bikes. So I would probably start by just trying some bike shops. You could even call them first before you go to see if they do offer used bikes, and they might have it on their website too. So doing a little shopping around could be helpful. John, something to add?
Garage sales are, I've purchased 2 bikes at garage sales, and hence my walking around. I frequent garage sales, and I've never spent more than $60. Now, granted, these are older bikes, but they're perfect for winter beater bikes. And you know, you can try them right around the block a few times before you drop your $60 or whatever. But they're always inexpensive, and I've found that just a fun way to do it.
Good point, John. And I think too, if you buy a bike either from the internet, off of Craigslist or whatever, or at a garage sale, you can also just bring it into your local bike shop and have them give it a look over too. I know when I bought my bike off Craigslist, I knew absolutely nothing about bikes, and I wouldn't have known if it was a good one or if any work was needed. So it's always a good idea to bring it to a shop before you start riding it to get a safety checkup and make sure that it's safe. Beyond anything you might see obvious wrong with it, there could be some issues that need to get addressed in order for it to be safe to ride. It would also probably be good to tell them that you want to use it in the winter. That is something that they might have some specific tips for you when you take a bike to the bike shop. It's just saying, I'm going to be using this as a winter bike. What do I need to know for that? John, anything else to add?
You covered it great.
Great. All right. And then we have I know we're 2 minutes over time. I just wanted to note real quick, there was a question, or not a question, but a tip. If you're a AAA member, you automatically have bicycle roadside assistance. If you break down during your ride, they will come and pick up you and your bicycle and transport you up to 5 miles as a basic member. So that's great. And then we have a question about encouraging the use of helmets. This person says, I still see some bikers who do not have helmets on. Having had a bike accident this summer, I'm more committed than ever to a helmet. Anyone want to talk about helmet use?
Helmets, of course, they cover a wide gamut of pricing. I think it's a really nice ones, really fancy ones. But one of the ways that we distributed a lot of helmets over the past few years at events was when we partnered with some of our bike share and scooter share, and they had promo helmets. These are nice ones. They're not your top dollar ones, but they certainly provide the protection you need. And frequently, if you look at the scooter or bike share providers, they'll list what events they'll be attending at. And if you attend one of those events, chances are they'll have a free demo and you'll be able to get a helmet. That's just a little helpful tip.
And something that we can do a better job about, but I feel like often comes up for why people don't wear helmets is because they don't want to look uncool, or it makes them, maybe they're not as flattering. But I would emphasize that there are many cute styles out now for those who care about that. So, checking out the different options online as well for all the different ways that bicycle helmets come. I think there's a lot of flattering ones out there.
Wonderful. All right. Well, that is all the questions we have. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. I will be sending out the recording and the follow-up email soon. Thank you again to John and Tiffany for joining me, and to everyone. Get out there, try some new stuff, break down those barriers. Thanks again, everybody.